Right. Oh, hang on. Just that the stream is being recorded. Thank you. Right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon session for the final day of our Unlocking Innovation event this year. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know, my name is Carl King. I work for the Railway Industry Association. I'm one of the technical and innovation managers, and I'll be chairing this first hour of this session. And then for the second hour, my colleague Milda will be taking over. Thank you very much. Can we just move on to the next slide, please, Natasha? So thank you. I'd just like to say welcome to the, for those who don't know, the Unlocking Innovation events are brought to you in association with Network Rail and Ukraine, and they are a means for getting the link between operators and the supply chain within the industry, and are free to attend and open to all. And I'd like to thank both our partners, Network Rail and Ukraine, for sponsoring the events. If I could just move on to the next one. The agenda for this was the agenda for this afternoon. The session we are now in is looking at rolling stock of the future. Now, this one's going to be run a bit differently. If we can just move on, please, Natasha. We will be discussing the way that it's done. We're going to have a series of very short presentations from some key figures within the industry, talking about their companies and individual viewpoint of rolling stock and where it will be going in the future. And then we're going to have a roundtable Q&A within the first hour. Excuse me. And then at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a post-it note pitching session, which Milda will be chairing, like I said. And there will also be an opportunity for networking at the end of the day. Thank you very much. So if we could move on to the next slide, let's get right into it. I'd like to first introduce you all to Craig Alexander, who's from Northern Trains, and he is their Travel Integration and Accessibility Manager. So Craig, I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Craig, you're muted.
An inconspicuous start, Carl. I'll start again. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Alexander, and for this little segment here, I'm really thinking around and the future of rolling stock in the context of accessibility. So we move on to the next slide. Clearly, any conversation around accessibility in rolling stock, level boarding is front of mind. An example here of Merseyrail's new rolling stock gives a real pointer to the way the future is going, and a significant amount of work going on there, some of it quite technical. There are other considerations that we'd like to think of as well, which I'll briefly guide you through. So if we move on to the next slide. It's easy to think about accessibility in a very sort of classic railway fashion. Wheelchair users are really important, but our world is changing. If we move on to the next slide, we start to see that the communities we serving are changing. So here, the example of we having an aging demographic, and what does that mean for the future of our railway? And you could look in other places there. You could look around how train travel is going to change following the pandemic, and what sort of customers may we be able to attract to the railway, and that might be different to where we've been before. Yeah, so customers' expectations on how they can travel by train are changing, and this is something we see as an operator. So if you look at some of the examples there on mobility scooters in turquoise, around buggies, around mobility aids, mobility devices, the expectation of how I can use the train to go about my daily business is changing, and that extends all the way to bikes. In the context of rolling stock, what's really front of our mind is how do we make the space we have available more flexible to meet all of our customers' aspirations and requirements. So what might we be able to do there? So if we move on to our final slide here, the real opportunities we see here, as I say, is how do we enable to have rolling stock which is flexible and meets different markets and different communities, and reflecting that trains serve different markets across different times of the day, to enable operators to say to say yes more often. So we know that technology is changing. We know that our population is changing and our customer aspirations are changing. So how, as operators, how can we be in a position to enable customers to travel rather than being some of the positions we've seen in the past, which is the often seen as blockers. So there's two angles here. There's clearly one around new rolling stock, and the other angle is around existing rolling stock. And a particular interesting question here is, what are the innovations that we can introduce in the short term, today and tomorrow, which is going to improve customer experience and really make our onboard space more flexible. Thank you, everyone. I'll pass back to Carl.
Thank you very much, Craig. That was very interesting. And move on now to Jim Bruin, who is the UK country lead at Hitachi Rail. So Jim, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carl. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for listening. I just wanted to really give you an overview of what we're doing within Hitachi Rail around the future of rolling stock. And there's three key elements related to sort of the presentation today, and that's comfort, connectivity, and collaboration. So this is about how we manage the future of rolling stock for stakeholders, and what thought process and work that we've been doing over a number of years to develop what we see the future and how that will look. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I think one of the exam questions for today's presentation is the way we really see some of the challenges that face the future of rolling stock development. And a key one is obviously the pandemic and the impact it's had over the last 12 months. And as an OEM, as a railway systems provider, we have to sort of fundamentally and obviously react to the changes that will bring. So that the key question that everyone's thinking is, how do we get passengers back, and how do we do that quickly? The area that we've really acknowledged is that as a group within Hitachi Rail is we need to focus on strengthening our interfaces and really providing rolling stock for passengers that relates to their overall experience, but passengers are key and fundamental to that. But we believe stakeholders, rolling stock of the future needs to do more in terms of its capability and support different work streams. So you can see there that we've got comfort plus connectivity. I'm not talking just about seat comfort and Wi-Fi connectivity, although that's part of it. With comfort, what we mean when we talk about this within Hitachi is fundamentally ease of use. So how easy is it to use rolling stock for the widest demographic possible? So linking into Craig's presentation on accessibility, you can see an unnamed member of our engineering team on the right in the presentation there. We engaged a number of years back with Cambridge University through first-class partnerships. And we've got an ongoing relationship with Cambridge around inclusive design. And what you can see there is we were kindly lent or borrowed the suit you can see from Ford, which is an accessibility suit. And what we did a number of trials on existing trains as they were in build across the Hitachi group to look at how fundamentally these are used by different demographics in society. So you can see there that sort of the suit, how you grab handles, how you open things, how you hear things on the train, how you visualize passenger information systems. We have a broad context in terms of the analysis. And what we've looked at is trends across ourselves and also our competitors to see what's good in terms of making sure that trains or rolling stock of the future, obviously passenger rolling stock, is easy to use and it's comfortable, because we believe that sort of we're moving or potentially moving towards sort of a leisure market, and commuters could be impacted. The connectivity piece is not, as I say, it includes Wi-Fi for passengers, etc. But connectivity is more related to ease of transition in how we phrase things within Hitachi. And that means the first moment that you think about using rolling stock, or booking a train ticket, to the moment you get on to the end of that journey, all of them transitions is what we mean by connectivity. And we believe by applying comfort or ease of use and ease of transition in terms of using the railway network, that the rolling stock is a fundamental part to achieving inclusive design. Within that, we can't answer that as an OEM all by ourselves. So I think the second question that we're sort of grappling with, how do we enable rolling stock to deliver for all stakeholders? And the key word within that, in the phrase you can see there, is collaborate. The earlier we engage with stakeholders, we should do that in depth. And often it feels to gain value for money, OEMs or suppliers within the supply chain are not, we don't collaborate enough. And we've seen this across within the UK in particular. We don't collaborate enough to define what stakeholders need before we compete. And I think that's a really important message, that if we do that, if we build on a collaborative approach across competitors, across supply chain, across all stakeholders before competitions take place, we'll achieve a better outcome in terms of the rolling stock that hits the rails. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I think focusing on the outcomes that benefit society are absolutely fundamental. We're in a pandemic, we're in an environmental crisis, and the railway has a key role to play within that. And it alludes and goes back to that strengthening the interfaces. So at Hitachi, we're making steps in terms of our partnerships, our acquisitions, to looking at how we can strengthen our portfolio across all rail technologies. It's clear that as an industry, our objective must be to decarbonise the railway by 2030. It would be amazing. Can you imagine the difference if we made an announcement tomorrow that we would buy no more diesel trains, and what that would mean for collaboration across the railway to do something special and something different? So we have ongoing, you can see on the right there, we've got ongoing relationships with Hyperdrive, discussing battery technology that we're working very heavily on. Hitachi's engaged with Toyota and JR East in Japan, developing hydrogen solutions. But we also have sensors, and we're also working, or the acquisition of Hitachi ABB brings more capability, that we have groundside power to charge batteries at the end of particular routes, so we can charge the batteries, in stations as well, groundside. So we're not just thinking of the future of rolling stock, we're thinking of how we power that rolling stock, because we believe the UK network will need battery trains. In certain areas of the world, of the country, we will need hydrogen. We will need further electrification across the piece, and that should be route specific in terms of how we analyse that. And it goes back to that collaboration point in terms of how we optimise the power supply for the railway. The stakeholder piece, I've listed a few there. Passenger, operator, infrastructure authority, so Network Rail, I think we can mention RSSB in there as well. Maintainer and owner all have different stakeholder needs from the rolling stock. And as an OEM, we're working hard to try and make sure that before we compete, we've engaged with all of these different stakeholders to ensure that we understand their needs collectively, and we deliver rolling stock that acts as the data center for the railway. It's the thing that moves up and down the track, so it can collect data. We should have infrastructure monitoring equipment on every new train, because that will overall, it will cost more in terms of the train itself, but the overall cost to the railway will be less, because we can give that real-time information to Network Rail to improve maintenance around the site. And I think just the last point I wanted to make, that if we're talking future of rolling stock, it has to be about UK supply chain. Hitachi is a big organisation, but my focus and my objective is to make sure I represent the UK and deliver for the UK on the basis of the technology that Hitachi produces. So the UK supply chain, we have an opportunity to be a world leader if we look and grow that supply chain and work collaboratively to achieve a rolling stock outcome that's world class. And I'll go to the final slide just to reference. It would be amiss of me, as you can imagine, if I didn't reference our factory. And although the guys you can see there in the picture look a bit intimidating, this is our newly trained welding team. So for the first time in many years in the UK, We've invested another 8.5 million in Newton Aycliffe to weld body shells. And we're also opening our paint facility in the next few months. So we are training apprentices to do more manufacturing in the UK and be a true manufacturer. So we promised that we would do that, and we've delivered that, over 120 million of investment. So the UK is ready for the next the next rolling stock, or the future rolling stock. We have a team in place that can deliver that. So with that, I'll pass back to Carl.
Thank you very much, Jim. Next is Angie Doll, who's the Managing Director of Southern Rail and Gatwick Express for Argovia Thameslink Railway. Angie, thank you very much. I'll pass over to you.
Carl, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. As Carl said, I'm Angie Doll, and I'm the Managing Director for Southern and Gatwick Express. I'm just going to briefly touch on the next 5 minutes on some of the things that we've done to our trains over the last 30 years to improve the customer experience, but more importantly, what hasn't changed and why we need to change to bring back lapsed customers and to win new customers. And the why is really important, especially due to COVID-19. We've been over-reliant, particularly in Southern, on our market, our core market of commuters, a captive audience with no alternative. However, the pandemic has changed this. Our core market has adapted to working from home and won't be returning to travelling 5 days a week. Therefore, we need to find new markets and make sure our railway is inclusive to everybody. So what part in this can the rolling stock play, and how do we deliver joint rolling stock and infrastructure improvements that can truly deliver the customer experience that the customers returning need? So what needs to change? So what's changed? Next slide, please. So a lot has changed. At Southern, we've introduced a new Electrostar Class 377 fleet in 2004, and that absolutely transformed the customer experience when we removed our old slam door trains. The new trains, no doubt, are a much better experience for our customers due to the automatic passenger information systems, air conditioning, automatic doors, etc., and for improving safety on the railway. However, I think the most significant change for our passengers was providing a dedicated space and accessible toilets for those passengers with accessibility needs. They were no longer relegated to the vanguard like third-class passengers. And it's fantastic that all these changes have taken place, but there's some things that still haven't changed. Next slide, please. We still need to improve the train platform interface. As an industry, we need to be more ambitious and innovative to create step-free access for all and allow independent travel across the network. Network Rail and the train operating companies are doing a great job to improve access in and around stations with new lifts, etc. But in 2021, we still need to deploy a ramp for most passengers to board a train. Pre-COVID-19, 13.4 million passenger journeys were made by those with accessibility needs, 1.2 million being wheelchair users. However, as Craig said in his presentation earlier, it's not just wheelchair users who benefit from step-free access. The elderly, those with luggage, and those with pushchairs all struggle getting on and off our trains. So we need to address this barrier. And more importantly, you can see from the slide, we need to improve safety. This graph shows the number of incidents at the PTI taken from the RSSB's annual report last year. It shows no material improvement over the last 5 years for fatalities, minor or major incidents at the PTI. And one incident is far too many. So now is the time for us to really think about how we build back better. Last slide, please. We must be more ambitious and challenge the status quo, because where we do have step-free access, like on Merseyrail, London Underground, and on Thameslink in our core stations, we know it makes a significant difference to our passenger experience and encourage more travel. Many countries have already introduced legislation and national programmes to provide step-free access between the train and the platform. The UK now has a great opportunity to drive these changes alongside all the other fantastic work that's being done to improve the customer experience on board the train and at stations. And we need to understand more about how the pandemic will change passenger demand in the long term. We must have a truly inclusive network as we need every single passenger back on board. Before COVID-19, often the argument for not having level boarding options like those provided on buses was that this would increase dwell times that the system couldn't possibly absorb. But is that still the case? TOCs are reducing their timetables, and the industry has realised that on-time railway needs less trains, so there is sufficient time to recover. The international travel market is not expected to recover to pre-COVID levels until at least 2025. So there is a great opportunity for domestic leisure and tourism with more staycations. So how do we make sure our trains can switch from commuting to leisure? Car use is rising and rail use is declining, and we have to arrest that decline for everybody in the industry. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and rail really now has to compete like it's never done in the past. So we need to change, and we need to adapt to new travel patterns. And rolling stock plays a really important role in reimagining the railway and building back better for the future. Thank you, and back to Alex. You're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Angie. It's Carl, actually, but thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Ale, it's all right. I think I have been told that Mr. Burrows and I do occasionally resemble each other. Moving on then, thank you very much, Angie. I'll now introduce Simon Jarrett, who's the Engineering and Assurance Development Manager at Chiltern Railways. So Simon, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Can you move me to the next slide? Great. Hello, everybody. I'm Simon Jarrett. I work for Chiltern, and we operate trains between London and Birmingham, London and Oxford. If you want a scenic journey, travel with us between those two cities. My apologies, if there's a lot of background noise, it's because I'm having some building work done on my house. But thanks for having me here. We'll go on to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about where we are as TOCs and what's influencing us, and also what's influencing government. So currently, most TOCs are operating on what's called emergency and recovery measures agreements with the government. So the DfT is bearing the costs of running the mainline railway, passenger railway. As others said, we've had a very significant reduction in passenger numbers, and we're finding that confidence to travel is driven by social distancing, the ability to do it, whether other passengers are wearing face coverings, confidence of cleanliness in trains. I think the key thing to remember is that for us as passenger operators, we only get two forms of income, either from the government or from passengers. We need to, certainly, the government is currently putting billions of pounds into us and can't afford to do that forever. So we need to get the passenger numbers back up. Next slide, if we can. COVID recovery. So as Angie and others have said, the new world will not be the same as the past. A lot more people are working from home, or will be working from home a few days a week. So that will mean that, but when the economy opens, there will be a short-term boost. It's likely as people travel to see friends, family, things like that. But also, we can expect that the DfT and the Treasury will be very focused on getting the costs back down of operating the railway. And there are some signs of that already, but it's going to be, for innovators, that's going to be a key area of innovation that we're interested in. The industry will have some new structures following the Williams review, and even following on from the current IRMA arrangements that are in place. The government's going to probably play a much bigger role. But we are being incentivized as operators to collaborate much more with you in the supply base to help you innovate, help you develop new ideas, new technology. So there is an opportunity there. If I have my next slide. What's the implications for rolling stock? Well, for right now, we expect a continued emphasis on clean trains, but also innovating to minimise stuff like COVID transmission and the effects of transmission of airborne diseases. There will also be an emphasis within TOCs you can expect on continuing to minimise our cost base. So if you're in the supply base, don't be surprised if we are putting pressure on you around costs, because we are having that ourselves. Next slide. What are the areas for innovation? Well, I can't emphasize it even more. We need to focus on cost reduction. It's quite likely that there will be some rationalization of fleets. The current fleets we've got were built around pre-pandemic passenger numbers, and I suspect that the passenger numbers certainly will not immediately jump back to that figure, and it will take some time to jump back to that number. So it's quite possible that we will see some reduction in the national fleet, which will be for the first time probably in 20 years we've seen that effect. But as the passenger numbers come back in the medium and longer term, fleets will grow again. The government may well focus on infrastructure investment because it creates jobs. They've got the levelling up agenda, and also decarbonisation. It will be interesting to see how they balance those various priorities, but it presents an opportunity potentially for private financing of infrastructure, things like electrification. We also may look to create new uses for rolling stock. So good thing about the rail network, it goes right to the heart of major cities. Isn't that a great way of getting small parcels and things into the cities quickly? So you may see new forms of kind of what you might call small freight using passenger trains. Might be an area of innovation. But we have more incentive to collaborate with you and develop your ideas. Thank you for listening. I'll hand back to Carl.
Thank you very much, Simon. And moving right on, we'll get on to Steve Lammin, who is the Engineering Director at GTR, for Thameslink Railway. So Steve, over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me, and hopefully I'll provide some challenge to the innovation team. Next slide, please. So I thought it was important that I attack this from the eyes of the customer. You know, it's now more than ever, as we've heard from our previous speakers, important to cover that, to provide that excellent customer service and see what our customers want from us. Pre and post pandemic, whilst our industry has seen significant changes, and we've heard from Angie and others about the ridership and how that will be changing, how rail is used, the customer request is very rarely changed significantly. They're telling us they want value for money, they want performance, want cleanliness, and they want safety and security. Obviously the latter coming from more face mask usage, and obviously how we protect our services from that invisible virus that is ruling our lives today. So many of my troubles, or many of the day-to-day troubles, which the problem statement was written for me, was how do we communicate this to our passengers when it comes to our rolling stock? Our passenger information systems hold many limitations. Some come with age and the technology that brings. Some are unfortunate in design and specification, all which challenges me and challenges how we communicate that form of communication to our passengers. How real and live can I inform our customers about our performance? How can I support their onward journeys in times of issues? How can I inform them the collaboration that we've been doing with certain regulatory bodies, the British Transport Police as the example, on the efficacy of our face compliance work? And how can I celebrate some of the great work and the fantastic work that our frontline teams are doing up and down the country to service and secure the services to which we provide? I feel sometimes we have a void in this space when it comes to our rolling stock. But we also have this fantastic data communication backbone along many of our rolling stock, which provides us with that data, that information that we need. And also some of that information and that line of communication that we have is so key in some of the accessibility and the inclusivity of our rolling stock, particularly when it comes to audio and visual communication. It's very key. We also exploit some of that information on our trains. It's not just for the customer use, for the basic amenities which they've come to know and love. It's a key reliance on us as the asset maintainer, as the operator, and also as our engineers and our service teams alike require that information in order to provide that continuous improvement, that reduction of cost that Simon was talking about. And that's what holds its limitations for me. Next slide, please. So customers are continually telling us, brilliant basics is what they want. I want brilliant basics. I think a brilliant basic for me is having a capability built in and something that I can fully utilize. Our customers want things to work. So do we as operators want things to work. We want to provide that comfort and assurance that the customer is seeking for. I think the industry is seeing many improvements as we've seen in rolling stock. GTR personally in my operation has seen a completion of a 5-year cascade, which has allowed the introduction of the Zero City fleet onto our network and some of the 387s alike, and that has reduced some of the limitations in terms of our operation. And we're obviously seeing more rolling stock new builds and new train deliveries coming onto the network, which will replace some of the legacy fleets and replace some of those basic amenities our customers now come to expect, but also unlocking some of that key information and key data which will support many areas of some of the accessibility, the decarbonisation work that Jim talks about, and other excellent areas in which to benefit from. Also, hopefully you've just recently read about how the Electrostarts are, under the ownership of Porterbrook, are having a multi-million-pound investment. And this is enabling a functionality for us as the operator within GTR and the maintainer to gain more information from our rolling stock, to build back better and build that capability to communicate with our passengers and obviously our service operation teams about how we make that service better for our customers. Just to pop onto the next slide, please. So I suppose the thread I'm trying to weave through these short slides is I'm trying to address the value for money, the performance of safety and cleanliness, probably in one big bite, which is probably the wrong thing to do. But for me, I think this is more data information driven. In order to build back better, we need to unlock how we utilize our rolling stock and transfer this data that we have into knowledge in our railway at pace. We need to enable a proposition of customer choice. We need to communicate at pace, veracity, frequency the customer demands. And we need easier, better and faster capabilities to communicate with our rolling stock systems to enhance that customer experience, the maintenance and the service offering for which we provide. My head of engineering and Jim, you've heard from, call these maintenance drones. I tend to agree with both of them. These are fantastic machines running up and down our network. As Jim states, they suck up data from everything from infrastructure to how our passengers move. My challenge is how we actually use this data. How easily obtainable is it for us to really build back better for our customers and for us to have this integrated in part of the railway system? I am aware of a number of new and exciting programs and the collaboration of the supply chain, the rolling stock owners, Network Rail, and other rail industry colleagues alike are doing in this space. I'm also aware of really other exciting projects underway, Project Speed amongst many that are muted alongside this. But I'm still challenged by the rate of pace of change alongside some of the capacity constraints that exist. And simply, I think we need to unlock these and exploit the opportunity we have within our industry today and within the rolling stock of tomorrow. This industry has changed forever, and we're being challenged by the very contracts that Simon mentioned that we're currently operating under. They challenge us for industry solutions, building back better, building collaboration and sharing of our data sources. For me, we've got a fantastic opportunity here and now to deliver this successfully as an industry, and I'd like to challenge us to get on and do it. And I'd like to say thank you for listening to me, and I'll hand back to Carl. And it is Carl, I hope I got your name right.
Yeah.
for the next speaker. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Steve. No worries at all. And moving straight on, we'll now go to Neil Ovenden from the Railway Delivery Group, who's their head of engineering. So Neil, if you'd like to give us your view.
Thank you, Carl, and thanks to all the previous speakers. Next slide, please. So I won't have many slides, and it's a bit bullet pointy, but I thought I'd take a stock take of the current February 2021 GB rolling stock. So what have we got out of that national rolling stock that we've got deployed today? So a very large number of new fleets recently introduced. Significant investment in upgrading any cascaded fleets associated with those new fleets being introduced. And some of the previous speakers have spoken about that. Significantly improved customer environment, both the electronic environment, Wi-Fi, etc., but also the physical environment. A significant improvement in the sustainability and the journey towards zero carbon in terms of the new fleet. Less emissions, less pollutant, cleaner running, more electric fleet, obviously, and beginning to see some fleets that are alternatively other than diesel fueled. The fleet that we're beginning to introduce now, even if they are diesel fueled, they've got built into them future retractioning options, which is good, of course. But what are the challenges with the current fleet? Simon and others have alluded to it. The annual cost of ownership and maintenance of our new and upgraded fleets in a post-COVID world is going to be a massive challenge for us. It's going to be many years before we get back to the patronage that we used to have, particularly the patronage in commuters. We may never get back to there. People who used to travel 9 or 10 times a fortnight to commute are probably only going to be traveling 5, 6 or 7 times a fortnight. That's a fact. And a consequence of that is we're going to have a massive pressure on the cost of running the railways. Thus, we're going to have a massive pressure on the annual cost of ownership and maintenance of new and upgraded fleets. What can you do to help us? When we introduce new fleets, there is always a deep and extended performance hit. Often it is, many tens of percent, perhaps even many hundreds of percent initially between the legacy fleet that we remove and the new fleet that we introduce. Typically, it lasts 18 months to 2 years, but sometimes longer before those new fleets are delivering the performance that they were predicated around, and performance equals cost. So for all that time, 18 months, 2 years or longer, that they're not delivering not only to their promise, but delivering below the fleets that they replaced, they are vastly expensive for us. During the current pandemic and potentially past the current pandemic, we are going to continue to deploy some of the technologies and products that we've recently introduced to assure that our train interiors and touch points on train exteriors are clean and sterile. It is vastly expensive and complicated for us to deploy these technologies and products in the ways that we're deploying them now. So if we're going to be deploying them in the future, how can we deploy them significantly more cost effectively than we're deploying them at the moment? An emerging issue regarding train interior air quality. This isn't just COVID. This is also other things. It's things like carbon dioxide, it's things like NOx, and it's things like dust particles. What can we do and how can we improve the interior air quality of our trains, not just for COVID, but also for other issues, as I say, like CO2, NOx and air quality. You'll all be familiar with the Boeing 737 MAX issue. Our trains have recently moved away from being hardwired to being fully software controlled. There is a potential, I'm not saying it's an absolute, but there is a potential risk for something similar on rail to a 737 MAX issue. We need to be alert to that. We need to be fully understanding of it. We need to categorize it and we need to mitigate against it. Next slide, please. So these are my ideas of things that innovation would help us. We need to significantly, not just a few tens of percent, significantly, many tens of percents, reduce the annual costs of rolling stock ownership and maintenance. And we need to do it quickly, not over 10 years, months, few years. Self-sterilizing vehicle interiors and touch points. If we didn't have to sterilize them manually, they self-sterilized, brilliant. If they don't self-sterilise, how can we automate the process of sterilising and cleaning trains? It's rather a manual process in many cases at the moment. We've got a lot of ideas, we've got a lot of prototypes. You can go to various test sites and run around on hydrogen and other zero or low carbon fuels, but we've actually got to get those trains into service. It's not acceptable just to keep trialing them. How do we get them into passenger service? How do we get them into freight service? Train interior, air handling, air cleaning, climate control innovation. If we're going to increase the amount of ventilation on our rolling stock, which is one way of making them more COVID safe, it's one way of improving the air quality. We're going to radically improve the amount of air being introduced into train interiors. That then has a knock-on effect about our ability and the ability of the aircon systems, the HVAC systems, to be able to control temperature. So how can we radically increase the ventilation rate on our trains and still keep our passengers and staff comfortable and not have wild temperature swings? I'm not quite sure what the role of innovation is in the last one here, but there's something here, I'm sure. We've got to quickly achieve through and full visibility of on-train digital technologies and their interactions, starting with the designers, through the suppliers of bits and pieces, through the programmers of the software on those bits and pieces, through the train integrators, through the train owners, through the train maintainers, through to the train operators. We've got to have through and full visibility on what all these technologies are, how they're working together, and what glitches, bugs are waiting to come and bite us. We don't have that at the moment, and we need to have it. I think that's my last slide, and I think, Carl, I'm handing over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. And that next speaker is Ben Parry, who is the Product and Innovation Manager at Alstom. Or should I say now, I'll let Ben do his introduction. Thanks, Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Carl. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, Ben Parry here from now Alstom. I think he did a good job of foreshadowing it. Most of you will know, I'm sure. So just for the very odd one or two of you that may not know, Alstom fully acquired the former Bombardier rail business 2 weeks ago today. So it's important you go into the presentation knowing that. Otherwise, it might be a little bit surprising and a bit confusing. Next slide, please, Natasha. So just a thought to have buzzing around your brain as we go through the slide deck. Does society move faster than our trains do? Are we doing everything we can as an industry in our rolling stock to meet the emerging needs or the ongoing needs of the society that we exist to serve? Next slide, please. And the answer is, well, yes, sort of. We've been doing it for a very long time. Urbanization, the whole concept of people living in more and more concentrated urban centres, you know, it's 70 years old. And if anything, our entire industry is based upon serving that long-term societal mega trend. Click, please, Natasha. I'll just give you a thumbs up each time if that's okay. But really, that trend, if you look at, say, a picture of the train station from 70 years ago to a picture of a train station today, the basic principles, the very fundamentals, have remained really quite similar. But the upshot of that is really, as urbanization has continued, really we've seen an equal increase in the climate emergency, if you like, and the climate challenges that we are seeing. And really, as enablers of urbanization over the long term, and as stakeholders that have capitalized, frankly, on urbanization over the long term, we clearly have a responsibility to react and try and nullify and improve the climate around us. We're very good at managing that long-term trend. What I think we need to be better at, and I think most people presenting today would agree, is the much shorter term, much rapid changes. So digitalization is a really obvious one, and clearly in the super short term. And again, please, in the super short term, COVID-19, you know, digitalization, you know, in the last 10 years, that first phone on the screen to the last phone are almost looking totally different. The picture of the train station arguably looks less different, and then clearly COVID-19 has been a one click please, Natasha, has been in the space of 1 year, we've seen even more cataclysmic change again. So what are we saying? I think I'm saying here we need to be much more fleet of foot and much more capable at bringing to the market technologies, products and services that meet a very rapidly changing need. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'm going to focus on is that climate emergency, and really about incredibly cutting carbon and improving air quality. When we came to present today, we were asked to talk about things that weren't too far-fetched, things that could make a real impact to passenger and user experience in and around the railway in the next 1, 2, 3 years. And everything I'm going to talk about today is effectively available today, or has been available for a while, to improve that passenger experience. As Alstom, we've got the world's first hydrogen-powered fleet of trains, and this is tying into exactly what Neil from RDG was saying. Stop trialing, stop doing one-offs, start deploying. 41 hydrogen train sets sold since 2018. Next click, please. Likewise, from the Bombardier portfolio, that side of the business, the world's first battery-powered fleet. A fleet of 15 trams in daily service operating on battery power alone since 2014, so now over half a decade. Next click, please. So when we really map that over those global initiatives, those global technologies running elsewhere in the world today on catenary-free green cell-powered technologies, and we couple that to what is now the UK's largest single rolling stock platform, well over 2,500 electric vehicles sold in a similar length of time, since about 2014, we absolutely have everything we need to compile and bring those suites of technologies together to really credibly start cutting carbon and driving clean and non-diesel catenary-free solutions, right now as things stand today. And on top of that, although my little two-car picture's got a bit squiffy, but that's okay. We are now in a position to start offering two-car Aventras, which enable us to have an optimized train length for the operation. So if you only need 2 cars and not 3 or not 4, you can have 2 cars. If you want the interchangeability of running 2s, 4s, 6s and 8s to deal with a big change in ridership throughout the day or throughout the week, it gives that operational flexibility. And certainly in a post-COVID world, that's really important. It also enables us to credibly replace these 2-car DMUs, these aging DMUs that really need a 2-car modern electric non-diesel option. And both, and that can all be dealt with either with a battery type approach or a hydrogen type approach. Final click of this slide. Now we're here today to talk about rolling stock, but as was also referenced by the Hitachi camp, electrification of course can form part of that, as can last mile solutions such as electric buses and other type solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's responding to the longer term climate stuff, but how are we getting better and what can we do on the short term stuff? COVID's been mentioned a few times today. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And one of the big things that we've really pivoted to try and do is bring in technologies as fast as possible, make them commercially available to really encourage and drive people back to the railway and feel safe travelling by train. What we do have now available is replacement air filters for the air conditioning systems. These have a range of materials in them, a latex compound with an alumina trihydrate technology to ensure that we can still maintain the fire and smoke performance. But on top of that, you've then got a silvered layer which brings with it its antiviral properties and antibacterial effects that actually adheres itself to the virus on contact, and a very short time after that, the virus actually dies. That's been trialled in the UK on Electrostar. We've been in talks with Aventra fleet owners, and it's totally transposable to non-Alstom fleets as well. So importantly, again, talking about things that are available now, not in 5 years, to solve the passenger experience challenges we have today. That's something that has a 99.9% coronavirus killing efficacy. It takes 10 minutes to install it. And because of the coatings that we apply, it actually lasts 5 times longer than a standard air filter, which offsets any increase in cost. The other thing in terms of dealing with the sort of short-term exponential spike I showed you on the first graph is around digitalization and how do we respond to digitalization. And I think it was Steve at GCR was talking about really making the most of data, turning that into knowledge and information, and really empowering not just the passenger and allowing them to feel in control and knowing what's happening with their journey and feeling informed enough to make meaningful decisions, but also in the reverse direction, taking the passenger's knowledge and insights and feeding that back to the operator. And that loop is a loop that everybody benefits from. So effectively, that could include the deployment of internal positioning systems on the rolling stock itself, at-seat sensors and Bluetooth beacons, and passenger counting working in conjunction with each other to manage and map and understand where seats are available, where standing space is available, and then that all links back to a passenger front end that empowers them to understand, okay, that's where the space is, and even go one step further and make reservations of seats in real time based on live occupancy, which today is something that to date on UK rolling stock hasn't been achieved, but we do have technology in our portfolio that enables that to be delivered. So that's the important point here. Again, live seat reservation and live occupancy, enabling people to find seats in real time, reserve seats in real time, and avoid peaks, which is important for COVID, absolutely, but is equally important in the medium term once we get over this pandemic. Because as other presenters have said, passengers, what they want has never fundamentally changed. They want comfort, they want to be able to find a seat, and they want to feel informed, and technology, today's technology can absolutely enable that. So to summarize for me, the societal trends affecting rail today, cutting carbon, absolutely, let's respond to the climate agenda. We have technologies in the portfolio to enable operators and owners and the travelling public to do that today, to improve the air quality in and around stations, absolutely available. Countering COVID-19, again, we have technologies in the portfolio that it's not about selling Alstom rolling stock, absolutely not. These are well-priced, low-cost filters that are no more expensive than the alternative, that credibly kill coronavirus on contact, which enables passengers to feel comfortable in returning to the railway as quickly as possible. And finally, delivering digitalization. How do we create a modern passenger experience that is significantly improved over the experience they're seeing today, wherein they feel like they are receiving personalized, actionable information directly to them, and also enables them to go out and look for the things that they place value in. And again, for most passengers, regardless of demographic, it's the same thing. Let's get them a comfortable seat. Let's keep them separate from other people, and help to spread that peak, which benefits the operator as well as the passenger. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. I'll move straight on to Jordan Smith, who is the lead human factors specialist at RSSB, and then we'll close. Thank you very much, Jordan.
Thank you, Carl. And today I'm going to cover, I think, some of the things that have been touched upon already, really, which is quite nice to wrap it up in this way, but perhaps talk about them from a slightly different angle. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Natasha. So for us, one of the biggest current challenges we have is around passenger comfort. And I'm going to talk about comfort in a more encompassing way. And perhaps that's where it draws in the things that we've already heard about this afternoon. So in 2019, the national average passenger satisfaction score from a survey was 79%. And as a subsection of this, customer comfort was only at 64%. So the conclusion we took from this at the time of conducting some research on passenger seat comfort, essentially what we took from that was that improvements can be made in that space. So typically comfort is often thought of as being the interaction between a human and a product. So obviously in this situation, we're talking about a passenger and a seat. And if we look on the slide, considerations here are often things like the demographics of the passengers themselves, their individual requirements. You know, does our rolling stock meet the accessibility requirements and the inclusion criteria for those with both visible and invisible impairments? I think there's a lot of work in the area of understanding those impairments and designing rolling stock that are visible to us. It's the invisible impairments which often slide through the gap, and it's something that perhaps we need to understand a little bit more in terms of how our passengers interact with our trains. It also considers things like the seats themselves. So seat comfort is not just about how hard a seat is, although it is certainly a contributory factor. Seats must be designed essentially that they are comfortable for the entire user population that uses them. So this includes making sure that people can physically fit within a seat as a starting point. So we think about the width of seats in some of our trains at the moment, which has its challenges due to the gauge of our railway, but also in terms of some of the restricting infrastructure in the cabin, which affects our leg room and how comfortably we can sit. Because ultimately, if you can't put your legs in a position which is comfortable, it doesn't matter how comfortable you have designed a seat. You're not going to be able to achieve comfortable postures for a long period of time. So there is innovation that can be achieved here in designing comfortable seats for new trains, but as well as this, upgrading seats in existing rolling stocks as part of retrofitting trains. And a piece of work that RSSB did a couple of years ago was essentially to produce an objective scoring system which addresses some of these factors and allows people to build on this in terms of innovative design of new seats to get some of those minimum requirements right. In terms of environmental factors, the next posture is always the most comfortable when we think about seat comfort. Being able to fidget, being able to move is crucial to achieving comfort. And so in addition to this, the idea of personal space and privacy, I think is quite undervalued in our trains. Having a feeling of personal space is a huge contributor to feeling comfortable and something that's really being taken seriously and steps are being made in the aviation sector. Both of these things become more important on those longer passenger journeys. So thinking about users that are relying on that journey to carry out tasks as an extension of their office, you know, people that are commuting and essentially using that space around them to work, which is something that we see more, not just in GB Rail, but across Europe and the rest of the world. However, in the context, if we map this to bringing passengers back post COVID-19, it's easy to see how each of these become even more influential to passenger comfort. So things like personal space, things like utilizing the surfaces in your environment to do work, they'll all be affected by perceptions of hygiene. Ultimately, COVID-19 will have altered people's perceptions of what's important and what's comfortable for them on a train. So some of the things we've heard already, I'll repeat here, having HVAC systems that are effective at filtering clear air, operators displaying to passengers that they're regularly deep cleaning their stock will impact on this idea of comfort. And I think I wanted to draw this into the idea of first impressions and expectations that passengers will have. Inherently, we will have a first impression of what is comfortable, what feels safe. And it's the onus is on us to project that message to passengers to make them feel more comfortable. Research has shown that first impressions of comfort can last up to 40 minutes on a journey. And if we consider some of the shorter journeys to that, it doesn't matter how much work you put into making that journey comfortable. If it doesn't meet our first impressions and our expectations, then you're already fighting a losing battle in terms of making that passenger experience more enjoyable. If you could go to the next slide, please, Sasha. So we can see that comfortable seating and this idea of a comfortable environment on trains make up part of this requirement. And I wanted to present some of these things in the context of a comfortable passenger journey from origin to destination, with the addition of a couple of further challenges thrown in there, some of the things that we've heard about already from some of the speakers. So recent transport focus surveys have shown us that one of the key things that people value is being able to make their own decisions about travel based on live data to avoid crowds and things like that. And as we've already heard, it's likely that this may be exacerbated when services begin to return to normal levels of passengers commuting and those habits change again. Passengers will likely want to have more assurances that their journey is in their own control and something that they can plan to avoid scenarios that they themselves judge to be risky. The service being there itself is not going to be enough to make people feel comfortable traveling again. It's going to take us to be able to push information to people and help them with those individual requirements that we've just heard about. So passengers need that accurate service information about live crowding, capacity level so that they can actually make that informed decision. Passengers will also benefit from being able to plan that whole journey, and I'm talking about this in the context of being across modes. So this should consider personal preferences such as views on carbon emissions, fitness, time pressures that they have, these individual requirements. But the whole journey will also need to consider the accessibility and convenience of actually transitioning from one mode to another. And in essence, what I'm trying to get across here is that the rail leg of a complete journey should be seamless and easy for the user. And it shouldn't be thought of as this leg within a journey that could fail them. It should be thought of as this entire journey, and the rail part of that fits in seamlessly. All of this essentially is underpinned by having a reliable service, timeliness, capacity, and the infrastructure that sits on a rolling stock in terms of Wi-Fi. These are all things which underpin that whole idea of a comfortable journey for our passengers. Thanks, Carl. I'll hand back to you.
Carl, you're muted.
Sorry, I do apologise. I was still muted there. Thank you very much on this one. I'm afraid at this moment I'm going to have to pass on to Milda. But thank you very much. It seems we're a bit late for getting to the questions, but Milda, maybe you can integrate those into the post-it note session. If I could just take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for, I'm sure we all agree, some very fascinating insights there, which I think we all appreciate. And Milda, are you able to take over here?
Yeah, I am here.